I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. It was another tumultuous week. In a moment, New York Times op-ed columnist Paul Krugman gives us the nuances of the proposed tax plan and the reasons New Yorkers have to be concerned. The New York Times' Bassey Etim takes your comments very seriously. That's his job. He's the community editor for nytimes.com. He tells us what you think. And my Times colleagues have comments too. They'll get the chance to discuss the week's lead stories on the backstory. And I'll offer some final thoughts on Coda. But first, Nobel Prize-winning op-ed columnist Paul Krugman. He's also distinguished professor of economics at the City University Graduate Center. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Paul, you said online in your column, you said in the paper too, that this is the biggest tax scam in history. Why is that?
The scam aspect is that what they've done is to throw in a bunch of things that make it seem for a few years as if they're actually cutting taxes for middle-class families. But all of those go away. And then what you're left with, the naked final bill, is a huge tax cut for corporations that is paid for by hurting everybody else, by changing the formulas in such a way that most people's taxes will go up, by eliminating deductions for state and local taxes, which is a really big deal here in New York. So what they've done is they've tried to obscure what is a huge upward redistribution of income away from people who need it. And of course, they're taking away health care from millions of people as well. So this is, the big claim is that this is for everybody, and in fact, it's the most elitist thing that we've seen. It makes George Bush look like a populist.
How worried do we have to be about this? If the Democrats take back Congress or if they win the presidency next time, can it all be changed again?
Well, part of the point here is that it's not easy to pass things. First of all, even if the one scenario that I'm concerned about quite a lot is the Democrats could win a smashing victory with the public next year, and between gerrymandering and the geographic distribution of voters, still not retake the House. I mean, that's just pretty much what happened in Virginia. The Democrats, won by 9 points, and they didn't take the state legislature. So there's a strong possibility that we'll have a government that Americans did not choose, that Americans rejected, but still has the power to block bills. And then, passing big changes in tax legislation is hard. Corporations, having gotten this big tax break, will lobby very, very hard to keep it.
Governor Cuomo says the tax plan would be an economic death blow to New York. Is it really that serious?
Well, this thing is a lot more resilient, so that may be overstating a bit, but it's very harsh. It's this is a state that has a philosophy of taxing its citizens reasonably highly, more so than other parts of the country, and doing a lot in return, providing a lot of public services, providing a lot of care, providing universal pre-K, right? And this bill basically takes away the federal tax advantages that come from that. So it's a significant tax increase. It's going to make it much, much harder for New York to be New York.
Are people going to leave because of this? Is that additional tax bill that significant to a rich person that he would actually pack up and leave New York or not come to New York?
Probably not. I mean, the experience we've had, or some will. So it's always going to be somebody on the margin. But the experience we've had, New Jersey has had on and off taxes on high income, and it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. There are very, very few people really, in the end. A wealthy person who has had all kinds of good reasons to be in New York is not going to leave for Alabama because of this tax change.
Orrin Hatch and other Republicans say that he has a rough time wanting to spend billions and billions of dollars to help people who won't help themselves. Are there really programs like that left in the federal budget?
No. I mean, means-tested programs that are for people who are, as opposed to Medicare and Social Security, which are for everybody. And so he's clearly making you think we're talking about welfare. They basically, what are the programs? There's Medicaid, which is not for people who won't help themselves, and is most of it is for children, the elderly, and the disabled. There's food stamps, which is also mostly for elderly disabled and children.
And for farmers.
And, well, yes, but also, and most people who are not in that category are actually working on both of those programs. They just aren't earning enough to get those benefits from their job. There really isn't very much else. There's the earned income tax credit, which pays people to work. There's TANF, which is the tiny remnant of what we used to call welfare, which is, again, mostly is for children. So this notion, the bums on welfare, the welfare queen driving a Cadillac. 40 years ago, there was a little bit of that. There was never very much in the U.S. system. Now there's nothing. So this is a figment of his ungenerous imagination.
I thought the Republicans didn't like deficits.
Oh, if you believed that, you were taken for a ride. It was obvious. I've been telling people for 7 years that Paul Ryan is a phony. That everything he claims to be, that he's really just about cutting taxes for the rich and benefits for the poor, and then makes a pretense of caring about deficits. It was obvious that they never really did care, and now it's all out in the open.
If you cut taxes for the rich, if you cut taxes for corporations, does that help the economy?
It's, any tax has some incentive effects. And so even liberal economists will agree that cutting corporate taxes will mean that a little bit more foreign capital comes into the United States, and there'll be a little bit more investment, and it could help the economy, although, there are other things that will be starved. Crucial programs will be starved, and that will hurt the economy. But yeah, it might help. But the point is, it's no reasonable estimate, no estimate by a knowledgeable, nonpartisan source says that the growth effects are going to be more than kind of rounding error. Nothing that you would actually see in the statistics. One
of the things you point out in the Times this weekend is the impact on child health care.
Yes, and CHIP, Children's Health Insurance Program, which covers 9 million kids, the funding expired more than 2 months ago. So far, Congress has done nothing to restore it. They've been saying, we'll do something, but really, as far as we can tell, they're ready to let all of that expire. As it's run by the states, and the states will have to start throwing kids off it very soon. And that's a cheap program. That's a program that costs substantially less than the amount the Republicans are planning to give away just by repealing the estate tax. So, so it's really saying that giving millions of dollars to one wealthy heir is worth more than health insurance for 1,000 kids. That's the Republican value judgment. I can't believe they're doing that. Even I have a hard time believing that, but that is in fact what's happening.
Do you think any changes of significance will come out of the reconciliation between the House and Senate?
Well, the change of significance is that the thing might still fail. This is not a done deal. Turns out that they did it so fast that there are huge errors. There's hundreds of billions of dollars of unintended corporate tax stuff in there, so that the House cannot simply pass the Senate bill as it stands, and which means it has to go back for a Senate vote. And there's some hope that, first of all, that we might have a different senator from Alabama by the time that happens, a non-Republican senator from Alabama. There's some hope that Susan Collins, who was clearly taken for a ride, she was lied to by her party to get her vote. It's possible the Republicans won't have the votes the next time this comes around. Oh, and by the way, the House, there are some House representatives from California and New York whose districts are going to be savaged by this bill. Maybe they will have some second thoughts as they actually look at it.
And may wake up to that fact from their voters. Paul Krugman of the New York Times, thank you for joining us. You can read his column in the paper and online, of course, Tuesdays and Fridays, and his blog all the time. And when we return, the New York Times community editor, Bassey Etim, comments on your comments. Welcome back to the New York Times Close-Up. Joining us now, Bassey Etim, community editor of nytimes.com. His community is worldwide. He and Marshall Logren, the community manager, have their band of super commentators, more than 200 of them, who can be relied upon to bring their well-informed opinions and more to readers among us. Bassey, why do people write in? I mean, I always got the feeling that sometimes people have nothing else to do, but there are a lot of intelligent comments. There are a lot of comments that suggest stories that we can do, and that feedback seems to be really healthy for us at the paper.
Yeah, I think when we ask people why they write in, typically what they say is to contribute to the story, to add something that they feel like the reporters may have missed, or to add something that, just due to space considerations in the story, which a lot of them really do understand, that couldn't be added in. So what they really want to do typically is add depth to a story, add their own personal insights, add like an anecdote, that kind of thing. So that's the way we really think about it on the community desk as well. What we try to do is try to craft comment spaces where it feels like when you go into them, you're getting a little bit more, you're going in depth into the article in ways that just aren't possible when you're reporting news.
And as you told me the other day, something like 13,000 a day comments come into articles on nytimes.com. How do you moderate those? How do you decide which to put up and which not?
Right. So, we have a great team of 14 folks, some part-time, some full-time, who moderate the comments. And what we're really looking for, we've got a public set of rules, and then we have a private, longer, ever-changing set of how do you interpret those rules. But I think the most interesting thing about it all is, what we try to moderate for is civility, and then the next level of that is we try to moderate for civility within the context of our culture. Our founding editor, Heather Moore, once said, society moves on without New York Times approval, right? So there's a certain extent to which we can't moderate comments because we have to reflect the popular zeitgeist in a certain way. But then there's another sense where we really try to be at the leading edge of, is it possible for people to have this popular opinion and to express it civilly? And then if so, we are going to give you the mandate that you've got to express that civilly to be published in our pages.
So roughly, of all the comments that come in, how many are bounced? How many are too snarky, or not even snarky, too obscene or outrageous or whatever to actually be put on the page?
We actually only reject around 15% of comments coming into the website. And that percentage over the years has historically just typically risen. Basically,
why is that?
Because we moderate comments by hand.
So every comment is read or heard or seen by a human being?
Not every comment anymore. We've actually entered into a partnership with Jigsaw, which is part of the Google parent company, where we are basically to expand our operation, basically we take all of our previous moderation decisions, feed them into a machine learning program, and it can tell us the odds based on the text of a specific comment that we would reject it or accept it, right?
Fascinating.
So now we're at the point where we can take all the comments that say, okay, if these comments are almost certain to be approved based on the algorithm, we can send those through without reading them first. But then, the overwhelming majority, though, it's going to wind up with somebody reading them.
And does that give us the opportunity to accept comments on more and more articles?
Right, that's the idea. When this desk started, it was, a big group of people moderating comments almost as if they were letters to the editor, like carefully reviewing every sentence, thinking about what it meant for our coverage and all of that. Now we're at a point where, we've gone from doing 5% of stories for comments to doing 17% of stories for comments, and now we're looking at early next year doing 80% of stories for comments, And so what we've seen, though, is that as we've implemented this new machine learning algorithm, we keep the same amount of staff. We're just able to do many times more work, which is amazing.
Marshall Ogren was saying that there are some characteristics that a lot of the commentators share.
Yeah.
What are some of those?
I think a lot of them share a deep, deep concern with, news coverage, with the way the news is covered. I think they see themselves as writers. I think if I could say the one thing that they probably share is they see themselves as New York Times contributors in a way.
And they have become that.
Right, they certainly have. I mean, there's commenters who, for every comment they post, an average of, over 1,000 people likes their comment. I mean, you think about that. Every single thing you write, you can extrapolate that out and think, if I write this comment, I'm a popular commenter, maybe 40,000 people are going to read my comment.
Pretty amazing.
That's pretty cool.
And very quickly, what are the issues that generate the most comments?
Right now it's sex abuse scandals in politics, Donald Trump, and anything related to people's health. Basically the things that anybody could talk about around the dinner table, you could have a really good conversation about. Those are the kinds of things people want to talk about. The subways, that kind of thing.
Thank you so much for joining us. Bassey Etim, joining the community commentary. You can do it yourself at nytimes.com. And the backstory is next. Welcome back. Another week, another bumpy ride. New allegations of sexual misconduct by some high-profile figures. New tweets that put the president in some legal jeopardy. And close to home, housing authority officials under fire for lapses in lead paint inspections, leaving residents at risk. Joining me to discuss these stories and more are my New York Times colleagues, contributing writer Eleanor Randolph, national immigration correspondent Vivian Yee, and City Hall Bureau reporter William Newman. Vivian, you've written in the Times that the president has declared that anyone who is living in the country illegally faces arrest and deportation. What should people who are here undocumented, illegally, however we want to call it, what should they do?
Well, it's a tricky balance here because the federal government, even though it says that anyone is a target for deportation, doesn't actually have the resources to be going after every single person who's here illegally. And so people who are here have to balance sort of fear and practicality in their heads, where you can't just not go to work, you can't just not go to school all the time. Although understandably they're afraid of going out onto the streets when they've heard that ICE is in the neighborhood or ICE is in the subways. ICE simply doesn't have the resources to be everywhere at once, and so they have to simultaneously think of themselves as vulnerable and yet not necessarily a target on any given day.
What about the notion of being stopped for traffic violations, things like that? Is that something to worry about, or the New York City police not involved?
So I wrote about that in the context of Georgia, which is a state that is not only politically more conservative than New York, but also has specific laws outlawing driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. In New York, the situation is a little bit different because local police have been told, we're a sanctuary city in New York City. The state police have been told, do not, pull people over and just ask for their immigration papers. So on that front, I think immigrants living in New York City have much less to worry about than ones in Georgia.
Willie, what about the housing authority and this lapse in inspections? Does this really put people at risk?
Well, it's hard to say exactly. There's 50,000, some 55,000 apartments within the universe of 170-some thousand apartments that belong to NYCHA that were built when lead paint was still being used. And so somewhere under the later layers of paint is lead. And if that paint chips or peels, then it can expose the lead. There's about 4,200 of those apartments that have children in them under the age of 6, which is where the greatest danger is. The city doesn't know. The city went 4 years without inspecting for lead, as it was required to do. And
how could that happen?
Well, the way that happened was that in 2012, the federal government relaxed some of the rules that it had in place for annual inspections for a variety of things of public housing apartments. And so they said, go ahead and spend your time and resources on maintenance and other things that were badly needed. So the city stopped doing these annual inspections of all these apartments, apparently without realizing, oh, whoops, we still have to inspect a certain number of apartments for lead. And the city law requires them to inspect the 4,000 with young children, and the feds require them to inspect the 50-some thousand. So that went by, it started at the end of Bloomberg, it went into the de Blasio years, and it wasn't until 2016 that they realized what had happened, and it was a big management failure. And there were plenty of times along there when they should have or could have realized what was going on, but failed to do so. In terms of how many kids may have been exposed, we don't know, because the city has no idea how many of those children have been tested. They've said only a small number, 2, 4, the number has changed a few times. In that universe of apartments, those 4,000 apartments tested positive for high levels of lead, but we still don't know. And now they're going to give free lead tests to families in those apartments. But it's a big management failure.
Vivian, you've written also about Transparent, the TV show on Amazon, show that was supposed to be different, now having its own problems, and the whole question of sex abuse and the like. Is this a mass hysteria, or is this a long overdue realignment, reconciliation of problems that have existed forever?
I think with the breadth and depth of the allegations we've been hearing in politics, in the media, in entertainment, it sounds like this is pretty widespread, and it's hard to dismiss, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 allegations in the space of, it feels like 2 weeks. It feels like every day we wake up and there's somebody new. And so given just how many different industries that it's cropped up in, and given the number of institutions that we've seen it happen in, it seems hard to dismiss.
Eleanor?
Well, it seems to me that maybe there are a lot of men who do not really understand what is acceptable. And for
What
me,
is acceptable?
well, you can't press, especially if you are in charge of somebody, if you have the power over somebody, then you can't press yourself on them. You cannot require sex of that person, or even as Al Franken has found out, you can't just suddenly decide you want to kiss somebody or grab their behind, So
And you can make them feel vulnerable.
you make them feel vulnerable. And what we've really heard from so many of these women is how that lasts, how they have felt afraid and sort of abused for a very, very long time. I think one of the real things that's going on is that people are still angry about Donald Trump, and how, not only did you hear him bragging about it, but he got elected president of the United States. So this anger is just explosive, and I hear it almost everywhere.
What concerns me too is that you think of all the women who are fast food workers, who are
Right.
cleaning hotel rooms and the like. They will never have the power to confront someone, will they?
No, but I mean, as I said, each organization, the hotel industry and the deli industry, they should set out rules. Look, you think you're smart, but don't abuse a person who's trying to work for you. Don't abuse the single mother who has 3 kids, who has to work 2 jobs, and who needs that job. That should be just a standard no.
It's called common sense, I guess. Eleanor Randolph, Vivian Yee, William Newman, thank you for joining us, and I'll have some final thoughts in a moment. Spiro Agnew was right. In 1973, the vice president was under investigation for political corruption while he was governor of Maryland. For months, he proclaimed his innocence. That October, though, Agnew pled guilty to felony tax evasion to avoid indictment for extorting bribes from contractors doing business with his state. He resigned in disgrace, but he was prescient about how the courts now define corruption. There's nothing wrong with taking bribes, Agnew said, as long as you can't do anything for the guy. Last year, the United States Supreme Court agreed. The court overturned the guilty verdict against former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. McDonnell had been charged with corruption for taking $170,000 in loans, gifts, vacations, and other benefits from a Virginia businessman. The businessman wanted the governor's help in promoting a dietary supplement made by his drug company. A jury convicted the governor. A federal appeals court concurred, but the Supreme Court unanimously voided the conviction. There is no doubt that this case is distasteful, Chief Justice Roberts wrote. It may be worse than that, but our concern is not with tawdry tales of Ferraris, Rolexes, and ball gowns. It is instead with the broader legal implications of the government's boundless interpretation of the federal bribery statute. In other words, the court drew a distinction between merely expressing support for a friend versus performing an official act or pressuring another official to do so. The first was simply politics, the second, a crime. There could be no quid, the court ruled, without what was narrowly defined as an official pro quo. Merely making phone calls, arranging meetings, and offering help on behalf of a benefactor no longer qualified as corruption. A fine line can be drawn from that decision to the juries that deadlocked last month in the graft trials of Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey and Norman Seabrook, the union leader who represents New York City jail guards. The McDonald decision also granted a legal reprieve to 2 of the 3 men in a room who ran Albany. The former legislators Sheldon Silver and Dean Skelos face new trials. Prosecutors face a tougher job in proving corruption. It's often been said of Albany that the problem isn't what's illegal ethically, it's what's legal. That's now more true than ever, despite evidence that the power of money corrupts. Does a public official really provide the same honest services to an ordinary citizen as to a wealthy contributor? It pains me to invoke Agnew again about ethics, but he once said something else that has proven true too. Honesty, he said, is a different thing to different people. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.